heard of an astrodynamicist, but probably not of a celestial steward. Dr. Moriba Jah is both and more. He's an astrodynamicist, space environmentalist, professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Texas at Austin, where he was the co-founder of the Oden Institute, Computational Astronautical Sciences and Technologies Group. He's also the co-founder of Privateer, a company advancing space traffic transparency, and as well as GaiaVerse, a global platform designed to make environmental data on Earth and in orbit accessible and actionable. In this episode of Everyday Guardians, we are joined by Moriba Jah to explore orbital sustainability, indigenous systems of knowledge, and what it might truly mean to steward space, not just manage or use it. This conversation invites us to rethink how we value Earth's orbital environment and to consider the ethical frameworks that might guide its use for generations to come. Welcome to Everyday Guardians, a special series of the Better Satellite World podcast, which is a part of SSPI's Securing the Future of Space campaign, sponsored by the American Space Exploration Fund. SSPI's Better Satellite World podcasts are made possible by our corporate partners, Access Intelligence, the producers of Via Satellite Magazine, Hughes and EchoStar Company, the American Space Exploration Fund, and the global law firm Clyde and Company. My name is Tamara Bond-Williams, Executive Director of SSPI. And with that, Moriba, welcome to the podcast.
Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you. Well, I'm just going to jump right in because I have so many questions and there's so much to talk about. Yeah. And I doubt that we're going to get to it all, but I'm going to do my best.
Okay.
Okay. So let's start with right off the bat, right? In the introduction, I mentioned that you've described yourself as a celestial steward.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what is that? What does that mean to you? What's that title? And why do you call yourself that beyond the other titles that you currently hold?
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of celestial stewardship, I guess what I mean is that we, as a society, make use of orbital space, but the way in which humanity has been doing that has been in a very colonial kind of way, meaning seeing the space environment as a resource, something to extract, something to exploit, something to dominate. These are all, words and behaviors that, we've been using. And the unfortunate aspect of that is that the environment's capacity to allow us to, fly these robots in the sky that we call satellites that provide very unique data and information to us. As a matter of fact, we know more about ourselves and our planet because of satellites than by any other means of information.
Mm-hmm.
But we're leaving space to be a junkyard. And just like we have problems with single-use plastics, plastics have been something that's contributed to society, but also detrimental. Everything that we launch is the equivalent of a single-use plastic. It's a single-use space system. Basically, it's launch, operate, discard, leave behind, rinse and repeat kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the space environment has gone from, one satellite in 1957, Sputnik, to over 10,000 satellites now, and 50,000 pieces of junk. And out of the 10,000 satellites, Elon basically owns and operates 75% of all of humanity's working satellites. So the space for all is really the space for the few. And the mindset in which we've been utilizing space has been colonial and extractive and exploitive.
Yeah. Yeah, that.
So celestial steward is really how to not be that way.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We've been having this conversation ongoingly since I think all year actually. We've been discussing the idea of care for the orbital environment. And so I really was very much attracted to the term. And I really also appreciate you referencing, the problem on Earth of the use of plastics, their profound usefulness, and yet their profound detriment to our environment. So with that, I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to divert a little bit from my original question.
Of course.
You were talking about this idea of single use, and it just hit me that it feels like we used to have the luxury of thinking that way, right? Because satellites used to go up into the sky and they'd stay there for a really long time, and they took a really long time to build. And we don't live in that universe anymore. We now live in a universe where satellites are quick and cheap to build. I mean, relatively compared to their prior ancestors. We send up thousands of them at a time. That might be an exaggeration, but I mean, honestly.
But I'll put it this way. Elon's been launching 60 every 2 to 3 weeks. So the thing is, it's a lot.
It's a lot. And so it seems like it would be a no-brainer, right? That we would just notice that we actually don't have the luxury of treating them the way we used to treat these 20-year-long machines. And yet we seem to have kind of stumbled into noticing that it was causing a problem. What is that?
So I'll put it this way. We've been noticing that it was a problem from the get-go, like people like Don Kessler, he was a NASA scientist for orbital debris and that sort of stuff. He knew that this would eventually cause issues, and he wrote about it, right? And so, but the thing is, it's one of those things where people are like, there's issues with the ocean being dirty, but the ocean's big.
Yeah.
That there's similar sentiment globally. Issues with space, but space is big.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's clearly, even though that is literally true, in terms of how we utilize space, that's not true. I mean, the places where we put satellites are very, few far and in between. Call them like orbital highways or something like that. And the thing is, these orbital highways are becoming more and more and more congested. They're becoming more, and they're becoming congested because, like you said, things stay up there for very long periods of time, and the rate at which we put stuff in far exceeds the rate at which things are no longer in that orbital highway.
Yeah. I had this idea last week, and I'm okay. Admittedly, I am a Star Trek fan, and so every now and then some random thought that was a previous plot on Star Trek crosses my mind. But I just thought about okay, so we have this challenge. Things are already up there. They've been up there for decades, and they're just there, and some of them are just dead. They serve zero purpose. And we talk about deorbiting and things like that. And then I said, well, gosh, how far out away from the Earth does something have to go? And is that just punting the problem onto another generation?
No. Yeah. So let's put it this way. So one of the reasons why people are launching lots of things into low Earth orbit is because, in part, there's this guideline that says, hey, you have 25 years from the moment your satellite dies and becomes junk You got 25 years to make sure it's not there anymore, which is a long time. I mean,
That's a
that in
really
and of
long
it,
time.
yeah. That's like I don't know, you and I driving on the freeway and we run out of gas, and somehow people say, "Hey, you know, your car is going to run out of gas and slow down and stop somewhere on the freeway. We're going to give you 25 years to remove it from the freeway." Clearly, that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
But that is one of the global guidelines kind of accepted for space. And the United States government took it a step kind of further and said, hey, 25 is too long. Let's say 5 years, which is still too long. The point is that because of that, if you put a satellite into low Earth orbit up to say about 500 kilometer altitude, nature, because of something equivalent to like friction here on the Earth, upper constituents of the atmosphere basically collide against the satellites and slow them down. Just like you're driving down the freeway, put your window down, put your arm out, you can kind of feel the air pushing your hand back. So this happens to satellites. And so if you put things up to like 500 kilometer altitude, it's going to take several years for it to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and burn up if it does, completely. Right. If it does completely. And so people are saying, hey, you know what? I don't want to have to deal with having to clean orbital space. So I'm just going to put it at an altitude high enough to where nature is going to just take care of it. But the nature taking care of it means that we can't predict when stuff is going to come in. If stuff doesn't completely burn up, where is it going to land on the Earth's surface? We've seen an increase in things surviving a reentry and hitting not just the Earth's surface, but close to populated areas. Somebody's home in Naples, Florida, last year. Yeah. So the abandonment is not disposal. Like right now, the space community considers abandonment a part of what responsible disposal is. And I'm trying to make the case that abandonment is exactly that. It's you left your junk there and to something else to take care of it for you. And you've washed your hands of the responsibility, so to speak. So that's the issue. And in terms of like pushing the stuff beyond, we do have a geosynchronous orbit regime where you put a satellite and it takes, about 24 hours for it to go around its orbit once. So it's great for, communications and that sort of thing. We have what's called a graveyard orbit. It's like, okay, because it's high up and it takes a lot of energy to bring the thing down, why don't you just push it up, nudge it up a few hundred kilometers above the geobelt and just leave it there. So we have the equivalent of a landfill in orbit intentionally, and it's horrible.
I'm chuckling because it's very much how we think of things, right? So it's no surprise that we create these parallel systems in space as what we've created in Earth. The more surprising thing is that we already know that it's a problem on Earth, and so why don't we think it's a problem in space?
Right. But I guess my point to all this is that you're right. We created this, but the we and the we created, that's the thing that I'm trying to put the lens on. The we and the we created is colonial mentalities. Colonial mentalities created that framework. It's not indigenous people. It's not people that understand that we have to be in balance with the environment, or that the environment is not something separate from ourselves, that we're part of the environment, and that the only way to live sustainably is to live coherently with the environment, is to find balance and harmony. Those aren't the values that created these systems. The values that created these systems have been colonial, have been Western, have been, what can I take? What can I exploit? What can I extract? What's going to give me money? What's going to give me dominance? That's been the value set that has done this. And that's why we are where we're at right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for bringing that in, right? Because that was one of the things that I did want to talk about, right? So you're talking about indigenous worldviews. And and just a very different approach. Um, which I think that the colonial by nature, right? Colonialism by nature was an extractive process. It's not a native to human
Absolutely. Yeah.
process. It was a business proposition at a governmental level, more or less. And so of course there are other ways to do it. But when we think about where we are today, right? We think about the governmental systems that are managing space, the private enterprises that are also managing space. How do we move away from that extractive mindset and into a more balanced or indigenous mindset? And well, let's start there. How do we get there? What does it look like at a policy level? What does it look like even at a technical level?
Yeah. So this is really part of what I'm trying to do with my life's purpose, is to restore humanity into sacred coherence through empathetic remembrance.
Mm-hmm.
And in the conversations, being inclusive, even though that's a bad word to some people now. Being inclusive and saying, hey, even though you don't have, the Dine or the Navajo, they don't have a satellite. You can't say because they don't have a satellite that they don't care about space or they don't have a stake in it. It's like, have the conversations with people, even though you specifically may believe that they don't have a stake in this, that, or the other. Listen to those perspectives. Consider, even if it's just for the sake of greed, because the thing is, right now, the way we're operating in space is not sustainable, meaning that the people that are making money out of it, they're going to get into their own way eventually if they don't change their behavior. There's got to be something different that they do. And what I'm telling them is this: consider, in a moment of weakness, consider that there are people that don't have three letters behind their names, but that have demonstrated that they have a knowledge that works in terms of environmental sustainability, harmony, all these sorts of things. Bring them to the table and consider these sorts of things.
Yeah,
that's what I'm kind of telling people. And whenever this is not happening, I try to highlight the absence of that. I'm trying to highlight the absence of that, right?
yeah.
And basically show these things. But the U.S. government supposedly has stuff going on with indigenous people. I think maybe it was Clinton that signed something saying that tribes need to be consulted by NASA and that sort of thing. I'm not sure that the White House has done a great job with that so far, even though it's written in that they need to do it. But those are the sorts of steps that we need to take in order for this change to happen. And the other thing too is this: we need to involve the public. And I think that's the stronger thing that needs to happen, is that, when I go to a store and, these days, I can shop and get some visibility into the practices that led to the products on the shelves. There's there's like fair trade, there's this, that, or the other. A couple decades ago, right? We're old enough to know none of that existed, but
That's
it
right.
does. It exists today. That gives people options. So to me, power doesn't reside in controlling outcomes of things. Power resides in our ability to make choices. And for me, those are things that allow us to make choices more aligned with whatever values. If people don't care about the environment, guess what? They can make that choice. If people care about the environment, well, there are ways that they can make those choices, even if the price is more, this, that, or the other. Same thing for things like plane tickets nowadays, right? When I go to United, I can see itineraries based on CO2 emissions. If I want, I can choose the one that is least harmful to the planet. And sometimes I just want to get there quickly and, won't care for that one trip. But the thing is, stewardship is not binary. It's not all or nothing. It's not, oh, I have to be completely one way or not. It's having the ability to make choices and giving people insight into that so that they can, use their values for this sort of stuff. And so to me, back to how do we get our behaviors to change and how we launch things in space and that sort of stuff. Basically, I want to give people those options, and I want to basically incentivize companies to say, hey, here's how we do our supply chain. When we build our satellites, we get materials from these places. These are the communities that we're working with, that sort of stuff. Incentivize companies to behave that way and let people know when you buy your satellite service, this is what that means to the planet. Like right now, there's zero accountability for any sort of space service that we get. I mean, I have no clue what the impact to the planet of operating GPS satellites are, or the Starlink satellites, and it's purposely kept that way.
Yeah.
So I want to tell that story. I want to open it up so that when people say, hey, I'm getting this product or this service or that service, somehow it utilizes an infrastructure from space, and that infrastructure from space has a cost to the planet, and this is what it is.
You are listening to The Better Satellite World, the longest-running continuous podcast in the commercial space and satellite industry. The Better Satellite World podcast is funded by the corporate partners of SSPI. Hughes, Axis Intelligence, the American Space Exploration Fund, and Qvia. Have you heard about SBQ? Space Business Qualified is a popular online learning program for industry professionals designed by JSOA, SSPI, and SatProf. To learn more, visit spacebq.org. In November, join Tamra, Space News Magazine, and the New York Space Alliance for the next New York Space Business Roundtable. If you want to get inside the industry's biggest issues and investments, meet startups and high-profile industry leaders from around the world, the Roundtable is the real New York event you cannot miss. To register, visit sspi.org/events. And now back to the Better Satellite World.
I want to say two things. One thing is I want to just thank you for mentioning GPS in the context of this conversation. When we started the Better Satellite World campaign, GPS was one of our prime examples, right? It's one of those technologies that just works, and we don't always remember to think about where it came from, the fact that it's satellites, and so therefore satellite is a net good in the world. And so you're taking it one step further and saying, yes, what does that net good cost? And do we value it? And it hit me kind of hard because I'm like, yeah, I can't get anywhere. I have the worst sense of direction. So I can't get anywhere without GPS.
Right.
And so I would value very highly understanding what are the trade-offs to make GPS happen, because I would absolutely make the trade-off. I would. I know this about me.
Yeah.
But we don't have insight. We just take this technology for granted, as lay people. And that brings me back to this other idea, which you said, we should think about the public, the wider public. And, I was asking the question, you saw the questions I sent you about what does indigeneity mean when you're talking about Earth, right? Because once we leave the planet, we're all Earthlings first.
Sure.
And one of the things that came to mind as you were talking is just how we have subordinated our own humanity to economic considerations.
Yeah.
And so we
uniquely driven by that.
We forget to think, I am first human before I get to any other thing. I am first human, and I have basic needs as a human, and everybody around me are also human and have basic needs as humans. And because we don't think that way, we allow ourselves to drive decisions strictly around dollar considerations.
Big time.
I just wonder, I wonder how we get out of that cycle. Like what
Sure.
allows us to own our own humanity?
So the thing is, even though Western society is uniquely driven by economic choices, not everybody on the planet lives that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's having conversations, having more conversations with those people. And one of the things that's unfortunate, because everything is interconnected, even though people that cause the biggest problems are the ones that don't accept that uh, interconnectedness. They feel that they're independent, right? It's like, okay, this thing is happening over there. Who cares? I have my house here. I live in this place. Who cares about Africa? Who cares about everything's interconnected? And nature shows us that interconnectedness on different timescales.
Mm-hmm.
Many indigenous people know and recognize these things, and these have been passed on through oral traditions and all that stuff, like for many, many, tens of thousands of years. But I guess the point is that those people, they're not making decisions based on what's driving things economically, but they're being affected by the ones who do, and disproportionately so. Most of the climate change issues done by Western, contributed to by Western society, are affecting the most marginal people that didn't do anything to cause the problem. So this is all to say, how do we get there? We get there by taking on the commitment to heal our own trauma, because most of the crappy decisions are made by broken men. Let's just call it out. It's broken men around the world. Most of them, broken white men across the world that have unhealed trauma, and because of that, they're fractionated and they've been disconnected from the rhythm of the planet itself. And they're uniquely driven by this idea of separatedness versus interconnectedness. It takes getting the public involved. It takes, I started Moriba Jah Universal to get myself into arts and entertainment. I have a book that's going to be coming out, or finishing in November, which is going to be, it's with One Signal. They're under Simon & Schuster, and it's about space environmentalism, a manifesto, everything that we're talking about here, but going into the weeds. I'm trying to get a TV series going called Escaping Extinction, where I go to different places across the globe that are facing local extinction events, and how to synthesize indigenous knowledge with Western science to solve problems in these places. But it takes going through Hollywood and enlisting art and entertainment to solve these problems, because scientific talks alone don't do it. The policy talks aren't going to do it. Humanity has to be enrolled in this somehow.
Yeah. I hear you when you say, that a lot of what we're confronting are decisions made by predominantly white Western men. And what came up for me, I'm always a little skeptical about naming groups, because I never want anybody to feel scapegoated. But that triggered another thought, which was just remembering the upheavals of 2020 and the chant that was going around here in the United States: "We will not be replaced." Right? This was a big concern. And I remember thinking, who's trying to replace these people? I don't understand. It was very odd to me.
Correct. Yeah.
But what struck me at a more fundamental level was that, nevertheless, whether I understood the fear or not, it was a fear, and it was very visceral to them. And it was an extinction fear, right? There was a fear that somehow they were going to be losing place in the global system. And it sounded like, now I'm not them, so I can't say what it is. I can't speak for people who are not me, but it sounded to me like it was a fundamental a fear of losing one's physical place in the ecosystem. Like I am a person, and I'm concerned that I will survive, that my children's children's children will survive. I am concerned about that. And it sounded like there was some concern. And so when you talk about extinction, obviously we have deep concern about the extinction of creatures, but apparently sometimes humans also have a fear of people going extinct. And I feel deeply sad about that, because I'm like, well, humanity is in fact not going extinct. It's only when we divide ourselves into little pieces that we think of ourselves that way.
Well, I'll put it this way. So two opinions. One of them is that humanity as a whole is going extinct based on our collective behaviors. But that's driven by these few people that we're talking about. The second thing is this, and this is paraphrasing other people. It's not my saying, but it's one that resonates with me deeply. When privilege meets equity, it feels like oppression. That's it. So to me, it's like the world needs to move more towards equity, because this is a shared place. But the few that have lived with privilege, that have lived in a way that has been colonizing, that has been living in a way that is extractive, is exploitive, is disconnected from the interconnectedness of all things, people that are aligned with those values are feeling like their time is up, and they feel like they're becoming extinct. They see the idea of sharing, the idea of behaving in a way that's regenerative, restorative, that's socially just. They see that as an existential threat of their values, which is, this is mine and I'm not sharing, and who cares about anything else? So I have to tell you, my message to them, if they're listening, you are going to become extinct. That's my life's purpose, is to extinguish the mentality of this extractiveness, of this exploitiveness, because we can't, as a planet, survive. Humanity with the planet can't survive maintaining those values. Those are inarguably and measurably unsustainable long term. We have to change.
Yeah. I really do hear that and respect it. It's one of the things that I think quite a lot about how do we call people in when they have a feeling, which is more than likely not true, but they feel it in their bones that what we're calling them into is a net loss for them. And so how do we interpret, encourage them to see the big broader benefit? And, one of the things, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, so what I was going to say is this. And I also want to be very, very clear with you and all the listeners. Within me, there's no part of me that has it against white men. So I just want to say that very clearly. None of that. I have love in my heart towards humanity writ large, in all sizes, shapes, that sort of stuff. But what I can say is that I am anathema to any practice that is rooted in this idea of domination. I am anathema to any practice that is rooted in this idea of exploitation and extraction at all costs. That is what I'm working opposite from. And so I've had these conversations globally with many people. I've had them with many white people, and many of them actually resonate with me. So I would say that in a majority, the majority of the people that I speak to, and certainly the majority of white people that I speak to resonate with what I'm saying. The thing is, those aren't the people with the power. So it's back to who's making the decisions.
Yeah.
Who are we putting in positions to make decisions for us? That is what needs to change. Is certainly those people. I think by and large, again, in the conversations that I'm having globally, I find deep resonance in everything that I'm saying, and people are very much aligned. I think what we see in the news and in the media is a very thin slice. And unfortunately, people take that thin slice to be, oh, well, most people are like that. No, most people aren't that way. Most people don't believe in war. Most people don't believe in, So, but again, the people that are making the decisions, the ones that are in power, those are the ones that need to, they're probably not going to change. So what we need to do is we need to motivate and incentivize, because it's a hard job. We need to motivate and incentivize those of us who believe in interconnectedness and regeneration and restoration and social justice. Those are the people who we need to incentivize to run for these offices and take on that burden of governance locally and globally.
Yeah. Well, okay. So speaking about laws, one of the things that you've said is that you'd like to apply ecocide laws to orbital space.
Yep.
And there's a certain logic to that, right? It's like we understand that there is a real harm. And you referenced Dr. Kessler. Obviously, he is who named the Kessler syndrome, which we're a threat of right now. So, but then again, right? How do you do that? How do you, first of all, apply ecocide laws to the orbital space? Who enforces it? Is there any mechanism to even know if people are complying? How do we make that work?
Right. So I'm glad you said that. So for me, and one of the things that I say is you can't enforce something that you don't manage. You can't manage something that you don't know, and you can't know something that you don't measure. So it's all about measurements. And in terms of who enforces what, it really comes down to every single country. Every single country is sovereign. It has its own laws. And in terms of international space law, every country is responsible for providing authorization and continuing supervision to non-state actors. So commercial actors, all that so commercial people are beholden to the governments that are licensing them to operate in space. So at the end of the day, governments are responsible for passing national laws, national space laws, where they could embed ecocide law into national space laws. And governments have the sensors to conduct the measurements, to monitor and assess for compliance and that sort of thing. The thing is, global governments, globally, we haven't gotten together and agreed to things. At the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs, there's this Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space that's lethargically slow in terms of things coming together and people agreeing to things, because it has to be done by consensus. And certain countries use that as a geopolitical weapon to block things from happening. So that's like, slower than watching paint dry kind of thing. Yeah. But, the UN also has UNESCO. There's like things like World Heritage Sites, that sort of stuff. I think it's not impossible for the UN to like say, hey, orbital space is like a UNESCO heritage sort of, thing. It's not impossible for countries to say, we're going to embed ecocide law within our national space laws. I look towards the global South as the place to find leadership and inspiration. It's not going to come from the United States. It's not going to come from Europe. I think African and South American countries need to be bold and say, we need to leapfrog and not follow in the same vein as these, powerful space countries, because they're the ones that have junked up the, orbits and all that other stuff. We're going to leapfrog that. We're not going to do things that way. And we're going to take our own values aligned with regeneration, restoration, and social justice and embed those within our own national frameworks. I think Africa and South America can do that. And I'm hoping to see any of these countries in both of those continents do such a thing.
Very good. And it would be quite exciting to see that development and see how it shakes up the world stage. We're coming to the end, so before we wrap up, I just want to ask you kind of maybe a consolidating question.
Sure.
So, given all that we've discussed, and as I knew, we have only just barely scratched the surface, but we covered some things. What do you feel is the most consequential thing that we can think about right now? And why? Why is that the thing that you choose? And what are you personally doing to advance that?
I mean, for me, the most consequential thing is accepting interconnectedness of all things, is embracing our role as stewards over owners of things, where stewards say, this is my responsibility, versus owners saying, this is my right.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to use technology, with GaiaVerse, we're synthesizing AI agents with large language models and these things called knowledge graphs to model the Earth as a holistic system of systems, basically collecting data from land, air, ocean, and space, aggregating that to show evidence of this interconnectedness, to show people, hey, it's not just words. This is how all this stuff comes together. And oh, by the way, when we change our behavior and behave in this way or that way, which is more regenerative and restorative, these are the outcomes. People actually can live sustainably in that sort of stuff. And everything from coral reef restoration to helping people in Gaza to help people in Ghana figure out where to put sanitation and hygiene facilities, to helping people in Kenya determine where to deploy electric motorcycles, to help people who've never had transportation before. We're working with people in Nepal to eradicate human trafficking, and we're also working space traffic issues. So everything that I'm doing is to show humanity all this, to show humanity a different way based on not things that I made up, but ancient values and traditions scattered around the globe that have been slowly disappearing, and using that uniquely to empower, give choices to people with a measured commitment to stewardship. I'm not interested in taking money from anybody. I certainly don't want to take money from the people that are going to continue to behave in a way that is extractive and exploitive. So I'm being very picky with who I'm taking money from and who I'm working with, because I'm here for the long haul and to help the planet heal. So,
Moriba, thank you so much. I clearly am going to need to invite you back to talk about GaiaVerse. It sounds like a really fascinating project and genuinely beneficial. So I hope that you will come back. Unfortunately, I actually do have to leave. I would have kept this going.
No, me too. I got something else that's coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all that you do to be a steward of space and to model that for us. And I hope you do come back.
Well, here's the other thing that I want to say along with that is that my behavior isn't perfect either in that sense. It's not binary. So the thing is, even though I consider myself a steward, guess what? I still eat meat sometimes. I know that it's not helpful to the planet, but I still eat meat sometimes. I still take the itinerary that's not the one that's the most carbon efficient. But the thing is, I also know what I'm doing. And I also say, hey, I'm not going to eat meat today. I'm going to eat veggies. I'm going to do this. I am going to take the most carbon minimal thing this time. So again, it's not a 1 or a 0. It's, you got some choices, err on the side of being healing and restorative. That's all.
Very well said. And with that, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Everyday Guardians, part of the Better Satellite World podcast series from Space and Satellite Professionals International. We're grateful to Dr. Moriba Jah for challenging us to see orbital sustainability not just as a technical issue, but as an ethical responsibility. This episode is part of SSPI's Securing the Future of Space campaign, sponsored by the American Space Exploration Fund. We also thank our corporate partners, including the American Space Exploration Fund, but also Hughes, an EchoStar company, Access Intelligence, and Clyde & Company for their ongoing support of SSPI work and this podcast series. New episodes of the SSPI podcast, including Better Satellite World, Space and Satellite Futures, and the SSPI Wise podcast, She Reaches, are released every Monday. Subscribe at sspi.org/podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to our podcast on YouTube. To find us, search for SSPI Video, all one word. For SSPI and our producer, Ari Yates, I'm Tamara Bond-Williams. And for the people and companies building a space and satellite future worthy of our highest aspirations, thank you for all that you do.